Hello, everybody, and welcome to Rooted. We're so glad that you're here, and I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge all that needed and wanted to happen to bring you here. So, forces both seen and unseen, current and likely ancestral. We know that this is both an investment of your time and resources to be here, and we also wish to acknowledge what exists inside of you as a curiosity, a wish, or a longing that compelled you to join us today. That is truly not insignificant to us. Sometimes I wonder, are such compulsions entirely our own, or could it be the prayer of our ancestors and the earth that we begin to gather in these ways in spaces like Rooted, in solidarity, so that we can put our creative energies and imaginations into birthing new worlds? We can acknowledge and honor the possibility for all of that to be true. So, a deep bow of gratitude to you, your ancestors, the land, and the seen and unseen for bringing us together. My name is Kareen Bell, and I'm the founder of Rooted and one of its co-dreamers. We are a communal space of hundreds of people who have answered a call to gather and contribute to what we call the experimentation with how we might respond to the ways that dominant culture has flattened how we can know and experience ourselves, others, and our world. This includes the ways that supremacy systems have created hierarchies of value between peoples and between human and the more than human world. We're experimenting in a variety of ways that don't focus so much on the trauma and oppression, but on the liberation of our beautiful, powerful life force through technologies of liberation like engagement with the arts and art making, music, song, dance, and unlearning and co-creating together. We are a body-centric space, meaning we acknowledge our bodies and all that we're bringing through these bodies into the spaces that we share is important to acknowledge. And we also acknowledge these bodies as the site of transformative potential to both value and nourish, and also alchemize and metabolize our many, many inheritances. Those that no longer serve our lives and our world, we might turn into new soil that becomes the bedrock of future worlds. The purpose of this introduction is to give you some context for what we're doing in Rooted, some of the values that guide our vessel, and how we're oriented in liberation work. This is important for us to share, so let's get into some of the reasons why. When Rooted first began, we would refer to her as a community. However, what I began to awaken to over time was the realization that when the word community is evoked, it doesn't come alone, meaning there are often expectations and ideas about what community means that might not yet be realized in the space. For me, the word community denotes relationship, but many of us, including myself and others on the Rooted team, we were strangers when we first encountered each other. Not only are we often strangers to one another when we first gather, we're not entering into the space unburdened by the various ways that our personal, interpersonal, and communal experience of relationship has been challenged. We'll get into more of that a bit further on, but what this means is that we do not assume relationship, which includes the elements of safety, intimacy, and trust. Rather, we put our energies towards the creation of the container and infuse it with the conditions that we hope can lead to the sense of community emerging for you. When entering a space that has anti-racism as one of its commitments, we acknowledge that many of the wounds, like those inflicted by white body supremacy, are hundreds of years old. And we do not, therefore, expect that these will be eased by us insisting on an experience of relationship and belonging that you might not immediately have. Wounds take the time that they take to heal. We only hope to be in service of an environment that might aid in that process. There's a beautiful quote that I'd love to share by Black feminist scholar M. Jackie Alexander. It goes, "It took 500 years, at least in this hemisphere, the Northern Hemisphere, to solidify the division of things that belong together. But it need not take us another 500 years to move out of this existential impasse." Creating an ecology of care is a deep commitment and aspiration for us in Rooted, and something we will fail forward at as we go. A care ecology for us is the creation of a container within which we can align with and act from a place of integrity with the values that we hold of reverence, respect, dignity, and care towards one another. As we acknowledge that each one of us in this space and beyond this space in our worlds exists in an interconnected web of relationship. A care ecology, as well, is a direct challenge to the dehumanizing, fragmenting, and alienating features of Western modernity, which act to divide and exploit individuals and communities. The care ecology of Rooted, then, is informed by values that guide us in navigating unknown landscapes as we experiment with how we might do things differently. So, what are some of those values? Throughout my own life, and especially during childhood, I'd often have dreams of flying. And these dreams would often be the most vivid, even lucid at times, dreams that I would have in my life. Frequently, too, I would dream of being inside structures like buildings or houses that I would try to leave, only to find that as I attempted to go through a door or emerge from beneath a ceiling, the door or the ceiling would somehow extend to keep me perpetually in a state of failed escape. Last year, I read a book by the author Nick Souzanis called Unflattening, which is this really, really interesting visual exploration of how the more harmful elements of what we refer to as dominant culture or Western modernity can create these perceptual prisons, much like those I experienced in early life and in those dreams. What Souzanis explores in artistic comic book like form are the ways that harmful aspects of culture often render our creative potential, the creative potential of our life force, deviant at times, defective, and unable to find life ways to thrive. This exploration reminds me of the monocultures of modernity that seek to standardize and unify things, not only eradicating their difference, but seeking to make them transferable, replaceable, and disposable, as is represented by agricultural monocrops. For us, reconnecting with bodily knowing, wisdom, and intelligence, and valuing other intelligences becomes an important value of ours. The idea here is that we have an innate wisdom and intelligence that we hold both personally and collectively, which challenges the ways that we're often taught to not trust what we know and experience. Embracing humility in what we do not and cannot know, which is kind of this cosmic perspective, is another value that we hold. The suspension of hardened truths and dogmas and the loosening of what becomes rigid in our perspectives and identities is part of this. Valuing borderlands, liminal spaces, uncertainty, and the unknown is about asking more questions than insisting on definitive answers and releasing the need or the hold of dogmatic and calcified ideas. Another is unlearning the intellectual and somatic narratives that keep us rooted to harmful elements of culture that we've been shaped by or that have developed from the survival intelligences that we or our ancestors had to rely on to survive. Unlearning and deschooling from how we've been culturally conditioned to relate to ourselves, others, and our world. Deschooling is a term from our friend Akila Richards. This concept helps us make sense of the ways from the time that we're very young that we learn to disengage from our sense of bodily autonomy, bodily wisdom, and intelligence, and we learn to externalize the locus of authority outside of ourselves. And this happens in a number of ways. It can happen as a consequence of how we were parented in our families and communities of origin. And it might also have happened for you as the consequence of being a part of an education system whose focus was on what South American scholar Paulo Freire calls the banking model of education. In the banking model of education, there's a clear dichotomy set up, that of the expert, i.e., the teacher, and that of the empty vessel to be filled with knowledge, so that of the student. In the banking model of education, you are not regarded as having access to wisdom and intelligence, Learning and what should be learned or known is prescribed for you. And other forms of intelligence, like those that link us to our intuition in the form of bodily knowing, dreams, and communication with the land, is devalued, denied, or even outright dismissed. These are just a handful of the values that guide us in Rooted. We are at heart a space that's deeply interested in various forms of addressing injustice. However, when we speak of a care ecology, we're also talking about a response to a way of engaging in social justice that often seems to replicate the same harms that it seeks to address. This is a critical piece of communicating what Rooted is and what it is not. I know that when I look around in the world and I lean into how we're going to disentangle ourselves and each other from the tentacles of colonial forms of being in relationship, I'm often despairing when I see how we can treat each other in the name of justice. I'm speaking here of forms that not only embrace a disposability culture, but also the subtler ways that people might seek to control or dominate the experience of others. This is not to say that we don't need to challenge ourselves and each other at times, but the how of it matters immensely. Ultimately, and this is also an aspiration of ours, the wish would be that we could exist in a space where it's okay to have an experience different from others, and even from the quote unquote teacher in the space, and still remain in relationship, rooted in reverence for each other and engaged in critical dialogue. I adore this quote from Black queer feminist scholar Audre Lorde because it is radically anti-colonial in its insistence that, quote, difference must be not merely tolerated, but seen as a fund of necessary polarities between which our creativity can spark like a dialectic. Only then does the necessity for interdependency become unthreatening. Only within that interdependency of different strengths, acknowledged and equal, can the power to seek new ways of being in the world generate, as well as the courage and sustenance to act where there are no charters. You are a beautiful, dynamic being on this incredible planet that we call Earth. And we are hurtling through space at the speed of 90,000 miles per hour as we speak. Can we just pause on that for a moment? I offer that right off top as a way of introducing some perspective here around what we're doing and to remember ourselves just for a moment. Each one of us entering Rooted comes to it from a unique lived experience. We represent different social and geographical locations. Part of the humility that we embrace is in embracing the mystery that is each one of us and the impossibility that exists for us to truly know all that each of us are in our many moments. Just as our own multitudes are often obscured by the ways that modernity tends to flatten us into rigid identities and categories based on what is valuable to it. There is tremendous hubris that exists, I believe, when a person or a space insists on everyone within it having the same knowledge, the same understanding of things, the same levels of expertise about a subject, and then it punishes those who do not. I want to say this from the outset. We are each coming into a space like Rooted, uniquely influenced by this world. And having this as a background understanding makes way for a lot of humility, empathy, and compassion for each other, even as we are challenging ideas and perspectives that we might hold and behaviors that we might enact. Many years ago, I had a very, very simple but very profound experience. As someone who has had a long history of loved ones with substance abuse issues, I was very sensitive to addiction in others around me. And I was in the midst at this time of a lot of healing from the harm that came to me because of those addictions. So one morning, I was in the train station near where I live, and I walked into the waiting area where I saw this man who was sitting in a row of chairs, and he wore a hood over his head, and he was slouched down in his chair, and he had this can of beer in one hand that was now like spilling all over the floor beneath him. And the smell was just saturating the air. I'm not really proud of this moment, but my initial reaction was disgust, and I was even angry. However, I have this really long relationship with Buddhist teachings and practice. And what was really interesting is that On the heels of that initial reaction came this thought, like a gift from beyond, to shatter my heart open. And it said, change one thing about your life or the circumstances of your birth, and that could be you or anyone that you love. And in that moment, my heart shattered and it softened. Each one of us has been differently shaped by this world, and may we always remember that. What if we were to release this notion just for a moment that modernity had the power to define the totality of who we are, whether we are in a Black body, we're a person of color, or a body of culture, as Resmaa Menakem says, or we're in a white body? What could we become to ourselves and to others? Modernity tends not only to flatten us, but also to tell us that we're distinct, separate, and singular entities. However, in many indigenous contexts around the world, people are not defined by being separate and distinct and unchanging. People are multiplicitous, and the self is something that is dynamically known in and through relationship. I offer this not so much as a teaching, but as a reminder to ourselves and to each other. It's something I always try to remember, that there is so much more to each one of us than the surface might reveal. Each of us has been shaped by our early life, by both our verbal and our pre-verbal experiences in our families and also in our communities of origin. We've also been shaped by the cultures whose values dominated those landscapes. And we have been and continue to be shaped by inheritances from our ancestors and our relationship with land and place. You look into the reasons it is not doing well. It may need fertilizer or more water or less sun. You never blame the lettuce. Yet, if we have problems with our friends or our family, we blame the other person. But if we know how to take care of them, they will grow well like lettuce. Blaming has no positive effect at all, nor does trying to persuade using reason and arguments. That is my experience. No blame, no reasoning, no argument, just understanding. If you understand and you show that you understand, you can love, and the situation will change. What all of this leads us into in the next part of our series is an exploration of our embodied experience and how it shapes how we relate to ourselves and each other, and how it impacts upon our experience as we seek to build trust and intimacy with ourselves and others in a space like Rooted, as well as beyond Rooted in our lives. This includes the self-responsibility that we can claim when we step more fully into a radical acceptance of who we are and how we got to where we are now. Wherever you are with the work that we all need to do to understand how people and communities and the planet have been shaped by harmful structures and ideologies, please know that you are welcome here. The more radical our self-acceptance and self-compassion can be, the more responsibility we can claim for how we're going to navigate our way through this. There's an important lesson here in how blame and shame not only slow down this process, but can stagnate it completely, and how acceptance and compassion can be a powerful catalyst to revolution. Scholar Arturo Escobar has talked about how we are collectively on this planet between what he calls the no longer and the not yet worlds to come. As we're learning to liberate our attention, as Adrienne Marie Brown said it, from the more harmful aspects of how we've come to live and relate in and through these bodies, and dedicate our time and energies to reimagining relationship and belonging, we are caught in a conundrum. I believe it was Albert Einstein who said something along the lines of, we cannot solve a problem with the same mind that created it. Just as many spaces that call themselves social justice oriented often replicate many of the harmful aspects of culture, we're careful and rooted not to claim that we know the answer to many of the questions we hold about how this world could look or how we could get there. That doesn't leave us powerless, but it situates us more fully in the journey rather than the destination. I've often described Rooted as not having a map or a set of fixed coordinates that will lead us to a known destination. If our imaginations have been compromised by the limitations that have been placed on us because of the cultures we've been shaped by, then how can we know the answer before we've worked with those limitations and broken ourselves open to an expanded sense of creativity and imagination? However, just because we don't have a fixed destination does not mean that we're without a system of navigation. And that system of navigation is guided by the values that infuse this space and the care ecology that we attempt to create in response to what has been denied to many of us. Through an embrace of these values, not as intellectual ideas, but as embodied compass points, we come into another kind of relationship with creation, that of emergence and trusting that while we don't yet know or can't imagine the destination, we can begin to trust ourselves and each other to take this next step, deeply rooted in a heart centered set of values and a refined compass that can enable us to discern in each moment what feels like the choice most anchored in what serves our collective liberation. We hope that this introduction to who we are and rooted and the values we hold has been helpful to you. As we prepared this, we realized how much more we could say here, but we'd also like to invite some mystery here so that you can begin to experience this space for yourself.